First comes Hawk, then Duke, then me, and finally you.
In all honesty, the purpose here is just to create a feel-good video. Ever since the G.I. Joe Classified line began back in 2020 and reintroduced us to our real American heroes in a new scale, there's a small feeling of accomplishment when it comes to assembling the command squad of G.I. Joe in 6-inch form. I am of course primarily referring to the leadership core as far as the Sunbow animated cartoon series is considered. Yes, General Hawk is in the top brass position, while Duke, Flint, Beachhead, and eventually Sergeant Slaughter fill out the ranks of field leaders. Naturally, there were episodes during the Sunbow cartoon series where characters like Scarlet or Lady J would lead as well, depending on the situation, and of course Lieutenant Falcon has his officer rank as indicated by the 1987 animated film. But of course, this video is about the leadership structure and ranking order that was openly stated by Flint during the 1986 Arise Serpentor Arise 5-part miniseries. General Hawk was the last of this leadership team to make it into the Classified line. The overall aesthetic, in my own view, has improved from earlier Classified releases of other characters, so he probably arrived at a good time with his 2023 release. Yes, his helmet doesn't quite fit snugly onto his head, but a great tip from the Toy Habits YouTube channel was to put his extra set of goggles underneath his helmet and face it backwards, thus allowing for a better fit, plus Hawk being able to either store away or hold all the gear that came as part of his Classified loadout. Duke has seen a few releases, and this re-release of him without the gold finishes gives him a somewhat more retro look, though the actual retro-carded release will probably be the preference of most G.I. Joe fans. Nevertheless, the Gridiron Studios command loadout here does a lot to enhance the look of the figure and takes what I feel was a pretty average looking figure to make it stand out and give us a Duke we can all appreciate a little more. Then there's Flint, who has always been my favorite Joe character, what with his more John Wayne-esque attitude and persona, plus he could easily go from playing second fiddle to Duke to suddenly leading the team on tough missions. Because this figure was so widely available during the time of its release, I did notice a lot of people making customs and kit bashing the figure quite a lot. It's more or less the standard of what we would call a solid release, and most Classified collectors I know have one of these and can appreciate its place in their collections. We also got Beachhead, who from that initial Season 2 episode of 1986 was dubbed as the team's fourth in command, and was released as part of the initial G.I. Joe Classified Cobra Island wave. You know, the one that was initially hard to find before re-releases found their way into the market. I'll admit that his loadout is a bit underwhelming, even though the base figure itself, in my opinion, is quite good. I'd say though that the accessories are something that specialty companies like Mark II Design or the aforementioned Gridiron Studios can easily remedy, though I imagine newer versions of Beachhead may supersede this one in people's collections. And while I did say that Flint was my favorite G.I. Joe character,
That's Sergeant Slaughter!
Sergeant Slaughter remains my favorite crossover star, what with being an icon in both G.I. Joe as well as the world of pro wrestling. The gold standard for someone who was a star in real life, in animation, in the comics as well as in toy form. It goes without saying that my appreciation for the Sarge goes beyond his fictional incarnations and extends to the man known as Robert Remus as a person. This figure was released as part of the G.I. Joe Classified line when Hasbro decided to go in a more retro faithful direction, and this figure is one that truly feels like he jumped right off the cartoon screen. Yes, he wasn't in that initial conversation in that early episode of Season 2 where Flint stated that first comes Hawk, then Duke, then himself, and then Beachhead, but Sergeant Slaughter showed up in his Triple T literal moments later and whipped the entire team into shape, serving as the team's disciplinarian. Where he falls exactly on the command structure is a slight bit of a mystery, and whether or not he ranks ahead of Beachhead, we're not really sure, but it doesn't really matter seeing as it's clear that the other Joes respect the man enough to listen to him. In general, the idea here really was just to assemble the G.I. Joe leadership group in toy form and then go back and compare the figures with their original vintage O-ring style 1980s counterparts, especially for those of you who collect both modern as well as vintage toys. Or if you only collect one or the other, I'm sure most of you can appreciate seeing them side by side like this. Have a look. And that's that. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and feel free to have a look at some of my other content, including other G.I. Joe classified videos as well as G.I. Joe vintage toy histories right over here. Otherwise, yo Joe, and I'll see you all again soon. Take care.